Told you I'd be back soon. Over the lifetime of my Obsidian Vault, my daily notes have seen the most consistent use of all. I don't always get myself to write and process fleeting notes, or organize quick projects into a proper folder structure, but daily notes have cemented themselves as a vital utility in my day-to-day work. Instead of purely an input for journaling, I've been using my daily notes as a method for tracking progress on various ongoing projects, in a way that ties into the journaling aspect, but with a more data-driven sort of approach. If you've watched my recent Tag Studio update video, you'll know that I've struggled with switching gears between projects while smoothly keeping momentum. And since I've always got an array of projects I'd like to work on, YouTube being one of them, I've been making the effort and experimenting with ways to relieve this gear switching problem. I looked at methods for time management, task management, and even ensuring motivation. Over time, I've learned what works well for me, what doesn't work, or at least what doesn't stick. But when looking at the types of tools that did work for me, and compared it to the types of issues I was still having, it all started to become clear. What I lacked was a way to keep myself accountable for the amount of work that I would spend across multiple, simultaneous projects. That's where this idea came in. This is GitHub's Contribution Graph, a year-long grid of blocks that visualize how often you've made contributions to code repositories. The brighter the green, the more contributions that day. And empty squares means you didn't make any contributions. Or at least not on any main branches, which is kind of misleading, but we'll ignore that here. Anyway, this graph has been pretty effective both at encouraging me to keep it filled out, and at giving me a good idea of when I've been away from a project for too long, like getting too focused on editing a video and neglecting to keep up with Tag Studio features. Or vice versa. There's just a couple problems with this. One, this is github.com. It's only for GitHub code repositories, and doesn't even show me everything for that. It also doesn't show me when I make progress on a project that doesn't involve submitting commits. And the second problem, this is still github.com, a website where I'm not seeing my profile here very often, unless I go out of my way to check out this graph. And I think some of you might already know where I'm going with this. Now, if data like this was inside of Obsidian, then not only would I be able to have it in front of me every day in the form of a dashboard, but I'd be able to feed it any data I want. At last, the perfect project management project to distract myself from doing actual projects. All in and wanting to give this idea a shot, I went ahead and looked around to see if anything like this already existed. That's when I found the Obsidian Contribution Graph plugin from VRANDev. VRAND? This uses the Dataview plugin to manage the actual data aggregation across your notes, and then feeds that data into a nice contribution-style graph wherever you choose. So it's the actual data that's being pulled to make this graph? Well, in my case, I'm using the presence of certain task tags in my daily notes as the source of these filled squares. For example, if I include a task/YouTube tag in one of my daily notes, then it displays a block for that day on the graph. I decided to set this up across multiple graphs representing different projects, with one main graph that includes all the tasks that I consider valuable work. Now, this isn't so much task tracking as it is habit tracking. This is keeping track of the projects I'm actually working on, how often I'm working on them, and then shoving that data back in my face to assess where I've been putting my attention and to take accountability for how I've been spending my time. Personally, as someone who can often get lost working in a single project or can frequently misprioritize what project to work on, having a system that helps me take accountability for how I've been spending my time is just as, if not more important, than outlining my tasks and projects themselves. Now, I've tried out plenty of things to try and get myself to stay on task and help the consistency of my productivity, but not everything ends up sticking around or helping in the long term. So I decided before I made a video on this, I was going to try out this method for a little while. Like the better part of a year a while. Just to make sure that this was something that could actually be beneficial and not some stylish yet ineffective idea. And you know what? It's actually ended up being pretty helpful, and has been an increasingly consistent part of my daily workflow that I finally feel has been helpful enough to share. As you may have noticed though, my method here doesn't support associating a value with the task performed. I could work for 30 minutes on a project one day and 12 hours on it the next, but both days would appear identically productive on this graph. Furthermore, if I could represent the amount of work done on a task, what would that be based off of? GitHub uses commits, which are easy to track, but specific to writing code. And when my projects range from writing software to producing YouTube videos, units like commits pushed, lines of script written, minutes of dialogue recorded, amount of channel branding completed, start to increase complexity without completely being representative of the amount of work completed either. So personally, I would find the hours of work committed to one of these tasks to be the most uniform and straightforward way to quantize general tasks, if I were to be able to do that in a plugin like this. To be clear, this issue isn't necessarily a flaw of this contribution graph plugin either. It has built-in support for representing units of work completed. It just accomplishes this in a couple other ways that I'll bring up later. And then, there's the elephant in the room when it comes to any Dataview-backed plugin in 2026. Obsidian Bases. Bases is Obsidian's shiny new first-party database feature, which allows you to accomplish a lot of what Dataview sought to achieve, but with Obsidian's own official system. Now, is Bases a complete one-to-one drop-in replacement for Dataview? Absolutely not. But it's able to replace a lot of what Dataview did, even while admittedly being in its infancy. And I believe that the tides are just going to continue to turn to Obsidian's in-house answer to Dataview. Since Bases dropped during this whole experiment, my vault has been going through this transition firsthand. Now, let me show you a little comparison. This is an earlier version of my dashboard versus the newest iteration. Can you see much of a difference? Yes, the CSS styling is a bit different, but the cool part is that the version on the right is now completely powered by Obsidian Bases. This version uses the Lovely Bases plugin, made by atorlg93. And I thought I had a hard to pronounce username. Lovely Bases actually adds quite a few new view options for your bases. Stuff like a project folder view, an infinite gallery, different types of cards, a carousel view. But the ones that I'm interested in today are the heat map calendar, as you can see, plus this linear calendar view. Something else I've been doing as a part of managing projects is using a separate base to keep track of all my ongoing projects, along with timetables and due dates. These are then displayed together on my dashboard, along with the progress trackers, and you guessed it, a linear calendar view that's also driven by those same project timetables. But the fact that this timeline reads from the same data that I've already got in my project cards, and gets displayed to me every day along with my active progress, has been genuinely useful keeping me on track with projects. So yeah, I'm now fully on the dashboard train when it comes to my vault. So in this whole habit tracking system, what are my ideal improvements? Well, I'd really like to quantize my progress with some sort of low friction input. In other words, some sort of system where the time spent on tasks can be calculated from my notes, and then represented with brighter or darker squares on the graph. And the more automated that is, the lower the friction there is on my part. This type of automatic calculation would actually fit in really well with something like interstitial journaling, which is something I stumbled upon while putting this video together. And while it's kind of out of the scope of this, I figured I'd at least mention it since it's got a lot of overlap with what I've been doing with my daily notes. But if I settle for manual values, the options available are a lot more down to earth. For the Dataview-based contribution graph plugin, the only two ways that I can tell at least, in which you can add values to the graph are by using the total occurrences of tags across different notes on that day, or by using the total number of quote-unquote tasks across your notes, which in reality are just any checklist items. And this also seems to include unchecked items too, which makes that a lot less useful in my opinion. Now for Lovely Bases, you have access to any of your file/note properties, plus custom bases formulas. This should open up a lot more opportunities for assigning task quantities that feel more representative of the work put in. Really, you could just set up properties for each of your project tasks, enter the amount of time you worked on those tasks for that day, and you'd be set. And if editing the note properties is too cumbersome, you could supercharge the notes with something like the MetaBind plugin to get custom input fields that connect back to the properties. But while this solution would work, it wouldn't scale very easily as you move on to other projects, and you'd have to manually keep track of the total amount of time spent on each one. Still, I'm tempted to give this method a shot going forward. Next, I'd kinda like to see if there would be a way to put all of this into a single graph, complete with multicolored squares. Now from a technical standpoint, this might be a bit challenging, and from a UI perspective, potentially impossible to get it visually useful, especially as you add more projects to it. But still, maybe there's something there. And finally, I'd really like to get a universal template going, making it simple to create projects, and then easily add or remove them from being tracked on the graph. That's some work I have left ahead of me though. I'll have a GitHub repo linked in the description, complete with an example of a dashboard with all these graphs. And eventually that should make its way to an updated Vault template. I understand this video isn't so much a tutorial, as it is a showcase of the kind of system I've been working on. So I'll include a lot more of the details of exactly what I'm doing over on that GitHub page. Also, if you have any questions, or just want to chat with other Obsidian users, feel free to join my Discord server. For questions about my Obsidian stuff specifically, I prefer you ask them over here, rather than somewhere like the official Obsidian Discord. I'm sure the mods over there would appreciate that. But that sums up where I'm at with this experiment here today. I hope some of you found this endeavor somewhat interesting, and maybe even come away from this feeling inspired to try something like it yourself, and maybe even improve upon it. If you're interested in more videos tinkering with Obsidian, make sure to be subscribed. I think it's about time I do an updated Vault Tour video. Thank you so much to my patrons for helping me work on stuff like this. While this was a bit of a shorter video, it spent a whole lot of time in the oven, so I'm glad to finally have it released. I've been Travis, and I hope to see you all in the next one.